last lesson, we discussed at substantial length the terms of the Treaty of Versailles that brought the state of war between Germany and the Allied powers to an end. We learned that Germany was suffering severely because of the war reparation that it had to pay, because the Treaty of Versailles considered Germany responsible for the First World War. Now let us discuss the response that the Germans had to the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Germans found the Treaty of Versailles unequal in treatment towards Germany simply because Germany was on the defeated side. And this led to a surge in public discontent against the Weimar Republic, because the masses now thought that it was the Weimar Republic that actually accepted the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which is why the masses were being filled with discontent and anger against the Weimar Republic. If we look at this illustration closely, we will be able to understand how the masses were infuriated with the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Here we can see Germany being squeezed to death by British Empire, France, America, Italy, Japan. So all these were the Allied powers and they are squeezing Germany to death. And what Germany is being fed are the peace terms as in the Treaty of Versailles. Though the Treaty of Versailles was supposed to be a peace treaty, the Germans saw this in a negative light. And here we can see it reads that you've got to swallow it whether you like it or not. That is to say, Germany did not really have an option of not choosing or not agreeing to the peace terms. It simply had to swallow it. It simply had to bear the cost of its involvement in the First World War. Well, this was the response that the German citizens had to the Treaty of Versailles. Now, at this point of time, the Weimar Republic was beginning to be resented heavily by several sections of the German society. Now, the conservative sections of the German society believed that it was better to be ruled by an emperor than live in a democratic federal setup. And the supporters of the Weimar Republic, that included mainly the socialists, Catholics and Democrats, were mocked as the November criminals. Now, why do you think what they called the November criminals? Well, if you remember clearly, the Weimar Republic was formed on November 9, 1918. And it is for this reason the supporters of the Weimar Republic were mocked as the November criminals in the nationalistic circles. Now, the nationalistic circles are those people in the German society who were filled with the spirit of nationalism were against the spirit of democracy. Because these people did not really want Germany to be democratic and federal in nature. Instead, these people wanted the conservative rule. These people were actually against the Weimar Republic, which they believed silently accepted the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Now, at this point of time, and unfortunately enough, it was the Weimar Republic that was having to bear the brunt of the First World War. It was already in a nascent stage, and it found very difficult while it was grappling with severe economic crisis. Germany was knee-deep in debts. Germany did not even have many ways to earn a lot of revenue. So the First World War drained not just Germany but entire Europe of all its resources. Now, earlier on, Europe was a very prosperous continent. It was among the creditors, that is to say, it used to extend help and loans to several small kingdoms and empires and monarchies. But now, because of the losses it suffered during and after the First World War, Europe now became from a continent of creditors to one of debtors. But this was not the only repercussion of the First World War. Economic crisis was there, political crisis ensued, but But what about the horror and trauma that lived in the minds of those people who were exposed to the bloodshed and violence of First World War? Because the First World War reduced human lives to nothingness. So many men died in action. They had to live absolutely miserable lives in the trenches. And the horror and trauma of this great war persisted beyond the immediate generation that witnessed it. That is to say, subsequent generations were also being haunted by this horror and trauma of the First World War. So the repercussions of the First World War were not just restricted to the political and economic scenarios. Those actually extended to the psychological scenario as well. People were severely devastated by the war. Lives became miserable for the citizens who witnessed the war and who lived beyond the war. Now, during this point of time, nationalistic sentiments were also surging in the minds of the masses. Because all the masses of different countries and empires and kingdoms were feeling rooted to their own state. Now, this was not always very positive, because the First World War also gave birth to a new definition of manhood. Manhood that is defined and characterized by aggression and violence. From this point of time, army and military forces were given more importance than the civilians, because certain sections of the society believed that it was glorious to shed one's blood on the battlefield in the name of fighting a war. Well, this is never desirable. Wars are never desirable in any part of the world. But there were many politicians and propagandists who painted a glorified picture of the soldiers' lives in the trenches. They were actually exhorting and encouraging more and more men to give up their lives for the cause of their nation. But can this ever be desirable? The loss of human lives can never be desirable. It is never sought for. But all these propagandists and politicians were actually romanticizing the concept of fighting a war. But the reality of war was very starkly different from the glorified picture of war that was being painted by these people. Now, when we talk about the propagandists during the First World War, we can definitely mention the English poet Jessie Pope. Now, Jessie Pope wrote a whole body of many war poems in which she exhorted young men to give up their lives on the battlefield. And these then came to be known as Jessie Pope's war poems. For instance, here we have one of Jessie Pope's war poems. Let us quickly scan the lines of this poem and try to understand what she is saying here. It reads, "Who's for the game? Who's for the game, the biggest that's played, the raid-crashing game of a fight? Who'll grip and tackle the job unafraid? And who thinks he'd rather sit tight? Who'll toe the line for the signal to go? Who'll give his country a hand? And who wants a seat in the stand? Who knows it won't be a picnic, not much, yet eagerly shoulders a gun? Who would much rather come back with a crutch than lie low and be out of the fun? Come along, lads, but you'll come on all right, for there's only one course to pursue. Your country is up to her neck in a fight, and she is looking and calling for you." So could you understand what is being said here in this poem? The most important lines here would be that your country is up to her neck in a fight and she is looking and calling for you. She is actually encouraging young men to go and fight on the battlefield. Even if they come back with a crutch, even if they lose their lives, they would be doing so for the sake of their nation. So this was the war, this was the propaganda that the politicians and the propagandists were suffusing the minds of the civilians with. Here we have few other posters which were also war propagandas. This reads, "Even a dog enlists, why not you?" So this is actually asking men to forcefully enlist in the military or the army. The next one reads, there is still a place in the line for you. And here it reads, this space is reserved for a fit man. So can you understand how a new definition of manhood was coming to being at this point of time? Men were supposed to be ruthless, very courageous, very brave, valiant and fighting and fearsome. And this poster is actually asking men that, will you fill it? And here we see another poster that reads, join the air service and serve in France. Do it now. So it's almost an immediate call to join the Air Force. Here is another. All together enlist in the army. So all these things harp on the same point. Man the guns, join the navy. So a man is supposed to man up, so to speak. They were supposed to go and fight wars. So here we see France, United States, and it is being said, Britishers, you are needed. Come across now. So all these were actually propaganda that was being spread among the masses during the First World War. But let us now look at the real conditions of the soldiers who were fighting from the trenches. The soldiers lived in deplorable conditions in the trenches where they had to fight alongside the decomposing corpses of other soldiers. So this was the reality. All this while we have been looking at a painted picture of the war. And that picture was being painted by those people who were safely couched in their houses. But these were the men who were actually fighting in the trenches. It was in the First World War that trench warfare was introduced for the first time. And in the trenches, these people actually had to fight alongside the decomposing corpses of other soldiers. So can you imagine the horror, the miserable condition of these people? These trenches were filled with rats, and even epidemics sprayed from the trenches. This was inevitable. These people also lost their lives to poisonous chlorine gas as well as heavy shelling. Now it was during the First World War only that poisonous chlorine gas and several other poisonous gases were introduced in the warfare. And these poisonous gases could cost the life of an individual in just a matter of minutes. Here you see two soldiers and their mule, and they are wearing a particular kind of mask with which we are not very familiar. Will you be able to say what this kind of mask is known as? This was known as the gas mask. Now during gas warfare in the First World War, whenever the opponent's army released poisonous gases, the soldiers and their animals immediately had to fit the gas masks. Because if those poisonous gases entered their bodies, they would be killed horribly. So this was actually the real picture of the First World War. And so can you understand why we mentioned that the First World War has been one of the deadliest combats in human history? But because of aggressive nationalism and war propaganda, support began growing in favor of conservative dictatorships. Now at this point of time, the governmental systems in Europe were undergoing very frequent changes. While democracy was slowly starting to establish itself, aggressive nationalism and war propaganda supported conservative dictatorships. Because with aggressive nationalism, the spirit of democracy never aligns. In its nascent stage, democracy failed to sustain itself during the interwar period, because at this point of time democracy was at a nascent stage and people did not really have any faith in this new governmental system. They have been witnessing the rule of the emperors and the monarchs for many centuries, which is why they did not actually believe in the democratic systems. Now let me ask you a question before proceeding with this lesson. Democracy became the most popular form of government in the interwar period. Do you think this statement is true or false? Well, the statement is false because democracy failed to establish itself and gain popularity among the masses in the interwar period. And this was happening because of the spread of aggressive nationalistic sentiments in the minds of the masses. Now, the First World War engendered a change or a transition in governmental systems, in power in Europe. So, let us now learn about that. Firstly, for many centuries, monarchies and empires have been in place in several European regions. And in these monarchies and empires, it were the monarchs or the emperors or the kings or queens who used to be at the helm of power. Now, after the First World War, many of these monarchies were being replaced by the republics. Now, the republics have democracy as their foundation. In a republic, the citizens get to elect their own representative. But during this point of time, democracy was not really very popular among the masses. The masses could not put their faith in the spirit of democracy, which is why they started favoring dictatorships. Now, dictatorships were gaining importance at this point of time. Now, dictatorships are characterized by the complete absence of democratic rights. It refers to the suppression of people's opinion, of people's rights and liberties. But you will be surprised to know that during this time, that is in the interwar period, dictatorships were gaining importance in several parts of Europe. In a subsequent lesson, we will be focusing on what this concept of dictatorship means in great detail, and from that we will go on to discussing how Germany then became a dictatorial state. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at deltastep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.